Right, so Labour candidates, they've got to be the highest quality, we're told. That is why rampantly unfair deselections have been conducted or attempted, isn't it? Diane Abbott, for example, was going to be deselected after having been left hanging for a year over the wrong copy of a newspaper reply got sent in and published, which she immediately apologised for and then got left without the Labour whip for months after her case had actually been dealt with, in an attempt to replace her through technicality. You then have Faiza Shaheen, deselected while she was literally out campaigning for Labour in Chingford and Woodford Green, as she has been for the last 4 years now standing against Labour, having been replaced because she liked a Green Party tweet once upon a time and liked a sketch by US comedian Jon Stewart, himself Jewish, criticising the Israel lobby. She was also punished for bringing up her own experiences of Islamophobia as a Muslim within the Labour Party. These are the most recent and well-known examples. There are so many more. It is ridiculous. But then equally, if not more ridiculous, you have the very people in Labour judging whether others are worthy, parachuting themselves into safe seats. So should we be surprised when such power-tripping individuals end up exposed as anything but high quality, and guilty themselves of committing the very things they are accusing others of?
Because they have abandoned very much of their Jewish identity. They don't go to shul at all. It's become a purely cultural thing around the occasional bowl of chicken soup or whatever.
Right, so that was Luke Akehurst. We should all be getting much more familiar with this guy by now, since he's parachuted himself into a safe Labour seat in North Durham. Arguably, in my view, the most dangerous man in the Labour Party, though. An Israel lobbyist, outrageously Zionist, was once photographed wearing a top with Zionist shitlord written on it, no less. A Labour National Executive Committee member sitting at Labour's highest table, someone who has been in a position not just for deciding who counts as a high-quality candidate to stand for Labour in the general election, and who isn't, but would also have been making decisions and rulings on allegations of anti-Semitism and other forms of racism that have been brought before the National Executive Committee for rulings to be made thereon. Yeah, there he is in a very short clip that has been unearthed. Now, that's despite Akehurst's attempts to hide such things by deleting some 2,000 tweets from his account by way of housekeeping, basically talking about good Jews versus bad Jews, in effect. Attacking people for not being Jewish enough, not going to shul. Therefore, they have abandoned their Jewish identity, but are still happy to gather around a bowl of chicken soup. A fair bit of stereotyping and attacking some Jewish people based on not being religious enough, isn't that? That surely is anti-Semitism, is it not? It is in effect denying Jewish people their identities based on some criteria he himself has clearly made up, and Akehurst isn't even Jewish, so really ought to stay in his lane here. He's just a paid mouthpiece for Israel, and the two things are not the same. I'm reminded of another case, actually, where Rupa Huck, another Labour MP, made a similar claim about black Tory MP Kwasi Kwarteng, referring to him as having been superficially black, since if you only heard him speak, you apparently wouldn't know he was black. Well, this comment by Akehurst falls into a similar, incredibly offensive trope, in my view. It's the equivalent of saying if you don't go to church, you aren't Christian enough to call yourself a Christian. How many of us were raised in a Christian household, consider ourselves Christian, but don't actually go? I mean, I don't go. I turn up for hatches, matches and dispatches. It doesn't change the fact I was still packed off to Sunday school as a kid whilst Mum went to church. I do come from a fairly religious family, as it happens, but I'm no less a Christian for keeping my faith in my own way, and that should go for every other religion too. And it isn't for some non-Jewish paid advocate for a so-called Jewish state to denigrate such people as he's clearly done here. Jewish Labour councillor Martin Abrams, a chap who crops up quite a bit on mainstream media discussions, certainly of late, has apparently written a complaint to the Labour Party concerning Akehurst's comments in this clip, and he's expecting a prompt response. As a Jewish UK Labour member, I've just submitted a complaint about Luke Akehurst's remarks here to the party, considering Keir Starmer has promised me that under his leadership he takes a zero-tolerance approach to anti-Semitism. I expect a prompt response. So will he get a prompt response? Is that indeed what Starmer has said? Will Labour act against Luke Akehurst? Do they dare? What say you on this, Keir Starmer?
Under my leadership, there will be zero tolerance of anti-Semitism, of racism, of discrimination of any kind.
So you did say zero tolerance to anti-Semitism on your watch then, eh? So how come you could, I don't know, suspend Diane Abbott within an hour of her Observer article response getting flagged? I think her apology actually came even before the suspension. Yeah, this is Akehurst, isn't it? He made these comments some time ago. This isn't recent, but having now come to light, and having now imposed himself as a candidate in North Durham for this general election, you would understand this would still have been subject to scrutiny, of course. Can we expect some swift action from Starmer here too? Luke was allegedly scrutinised by, well, himself and another fellow NEC member, James Asser, and then Asser himself was scrutinised to see if he was suitable to stand in West Ham and Beckton by himself and Luke Akehurst as well. So that's all above board then, I'm sure. Such is the right-wing makeup of the NEC that this allegation could be brought back to them and they go, Luke, you've been a very naughty boy. Don't do it again. Give him a slap on the wrist and off he goes again to carry on campaigning. But given the disparity in how right-wingers are treated versus left-wingers, not only is there blatantly a factional drive, as we all know by now, to wipe out the left, wipe out critics of Keir Starmer, who can't stand being scrutinised or criticised, leaving behind a Labour Party completely bereft of any semblance of a soul, of any belief in standing up for the working class, certainly not a broad church as it's always claimed to be anymore, as they were created to do, and will fully embrace their place as a second establishment party to the Tories, which will now seemingly never, ever change. Equally, and for the same reason, though, they will never be able to have a zero tolerance on any form of racism, because members cannot and will not be treated equally as a result. I completely believe absolutely nothing will happen with Akehurst without significant levels of outcry, and even then Starmer is so in hock to the Israel lobby, Akehurst could well be nigh on untouchable despite what he says. This isn't an isolated incident either. It's easy for people to say, Damo, you're covering Akehurst again. Anyone would think it's just him. But it isn't. Let's have a look at the body Starmer put in charge of racism training and education, the Jewish Labour movement, where you need neither be Jewish nor in Labour to be a member of, and it's chaired by Mike Katz, who recently, if you saw my video on this already, you'll know, appeared on an election panel hosted by the Jewish Chronicle alongside anti-Muslim journalist Melanie Phillips. But he's also been foolish enough to opine on the case of Faiza Shaheen and her barring from being the Labour candidate to 4 years of solid campaigning for the party for Chingford and Woodford Green. It's little wonder Martin Ford of the Ford Report wrote of the JLM's inadequacies in that regard in said report, but nothing has changed. Nothing in that report on Labour abuses and racism has ever been acted upon. Starmer buried it. Katz said of Faiza Shaheen's treatment in an interview with Politics Home that her social media activity was problematic, but particularly given that she's got a very mixed community. And the wider point is, we want people who are in positions of leadership, potentially significant positions, the leadership of the local MP, particularly where there are Jews and Muslims living side by side, to behave responsibly when it comes to promoting better community cohesion, Katz explains. He says the recent social media activity brought to the JLM's attention by local Jewish members included talk about the Israel lobby that she liked, which really plays into the traditional anti-Semitic trope of power and shadow control. It's really not very far away from that. Talk about the Israel lobby. So what's the problem with that then, Mikey? You claim that to be an anti-Semitic trope, but it's not. If she'd said Jewish lobby, then it would have been. But here you've punished her because you regard saying Israel lobby in the same light, presumably, which would mean you are conflating anti-Israel sentiment with anti-Jewish sentiment, and that would actually be anti-Semitic. Shaheen was also criticised over a quote referring to Israel as an apartheid state. It is. Palestinian lives are worth less, they have fewer rights, they are segregated. But to be punished as a Muslim woman for talking about her own experiences of Islamophobia within the Labour Party is just beyond the pale. And all Katz does is point to an independent complaints process which actually isn't independent at all. It's people like him, or if shuttled up the line enough, people like Luke Akehurst. If Shaheen has experienced racism herself, Labour should be dealing with that, not punishing the complainant. Yet instead we see that happen here, and you just know that because Labour operates this hierarchy of racism, as described in the Ford Report, and if it was a Jewish person involved here and not a Muslim one, you can't help but feel this would have panned out very differently. Luke Akehurst just keeps on becoming more and more of an issue for Starmer, and if he is truly untouchable, then get the popcorn out, as this is bound to continue. But it's not all gone on Akehurst's favour, as this video recommendation will tell you all about the absolute carnage of his election campaign launch. Couldn't happen to a nicer person, really. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.